Hi guys, how y'all doing? I just wanted to make this little tribute video here today. Today is November 25th, 2014, and it would be John F. Kennedy Jr.'s 54th birthday. Had he not, perished in that plane crash on July 16th, 1999. I mean, it's sad, to think about what might have been, like, had John lived. He was constantly bugged, not bugged, but asked to run for office, and at the time of his death, he was seriously actually considering it, from everything that I've read, particularly the Senate seat that was being vacated in New York City by Daniel Patrick Moynihan in 2000. Right now I'm listening to Don Henley, The End of the Innocence, and when John died, this song always, it's just like it was the end of the innocence. It's just really weird. It's just one of those things, I guess, you put together. But anyhow, like, at the time of his death, John was editor-in-chief of George magazine, and they had a 5-year contract with George, which started in 1995 and was due to expire at the end of 1999 into 2000. And they expected the magazine hopefully to turn a profit within 4 years, and unfortunately that did not happen. His magazine was actually several $1 million in debt at the time he died. Their publisher, Hachette, I think it's Hachette Philippaki, yeah, I think that's how it's pronounced. If I'm wrong, excuse me, but they would say Hachette. Most of the times it was referred, but anytime I ever read anything, it was like Hachette. They weren't sure if they were going to renew their contract with them. So a week before JFK Jr. died, keeping in mind that he had broke his ankle by crashing his ultralight plane on Memorial Day weekend on the Kennedy compound, Hyannisport. So he was walking around on crutches with a cane. I believe the day before he died, he had the cast removed from his foot, and the doctor told him that he could possibly fly again, but he was still getting around with a cane because there was still some, he had just gotten the cast off, so he had to take his time. But anyhow, he flew to Toronto, Canada, to meet with potential investors who could maybe take George and go somewhere with it, and potential investors. And I've read so many books about this particular conversation, this trip, and they said to John, you live in New York City, why are you coming all the way to Toronto here when the deepest pockets, the money makers, the people who could take over this magazine and bring it to the next level, are in your hometown? And I guess he said he liked to operate below the radar. So basically he was flying to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, just to look for different investors who could take over George and maybe bring it to a whole new level. John was particularly stoked at the fact that in the year 2000 was going to be a new presidential election. They were really hoping on having online chats provided by Microsoft, where people could comment on the election. I mean, it's not like now, right? Like Twitter and Facebook and all that. None of that stuff existed then. It was chatting, the internet. I don't even think there was high-speed internet when John died. It was all dial-up. It was 56K modem connections. It wasn't anything. It's almost weird. He died 15 years ago, but we've advanced in technology so much. It's just, back then it was the big cell phones. It's just craziness. Just things have changed so much since he died. Like in 1999, if you had a DVD player, you were cool. Like back then, it was still VHSs and stuff like that. Anyways, so yeah, he was looking for different investors for his magazine. He wasn't sure what was going to happen with being with the company he was being with now, Hachette, whether they were going to renew their contract, or if he wanted to have a new investor. So he was looking around New York, San Francisco, Canada. Like I said, he said his big issue was, don't let go of my magazine. My magazine is going to flourish, especially if George Magazine is hosting these online events in related to the 2000 election. He said the year 2000 could be the biggest year for my political magazine, George. He said, we can seize this opportunity, and it could be a very, very positive thing. And it wasn't about money, not for John's part. When John died, he was worth in excess of $150 million. That's his own net worth. Sorry, I'm just gonna turn this down. I don't want no copyrights or anything. He could have, from the start, 1995, when he started the magazine, I believe it was September 1995, he could have paid for the magazine startup himself. He had the money to do it, but he didn't want to put up his own money for it to do it, because he said that people would see it as a vanity project. That it would be, oh, JFK Jr. is putting out a magazine because he wants to brag about himself. In fact, JFK Jr. hated the idea of a picture of him being in his magazine. I mean, he wrote the editor-in-chief. He wrote the letter every month for that, because he was technically, the editor-in-chief. That was his job. He founded the magazine, and he said, the people that he worked with, they said, John, let's put you on the cover. Like, John never wanted to be on the cover. He said the only cover that he would ever be on would be the last issue of the magazine. He said, other than that, there's no way that I'm putting my face on George Magazine. And so he had celebrities dressed up as George Washington, different people, and then every issue of George Magazine, in somewhere of the front page, there's a little George Washington silhouette head in every. So each issue they reveal where it was for the previous one. It was actually a really interesting magazine. I read it. I remember buying it on the newsstands, and I wasn't particularly big into politics. When he died on July 16th, 1999, I was only 16. I turned 17 that December. So to be young, 16, being right into JFK, the Kennedy family, when JFK Jr. died, I was very sad. I was just shocked. For the past 16, 17 years, I've been collecting Kennedy memorabilia, particularly JFK, Robert Kennedy, JFK Jr. I don't want to brag about it, but I will say that I probably have one of the biggest Kennedy memorabilia collections in the world. I have spent thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past, like I said, 16, 17 years, collecting everything from magazines to newspaper articles to autographs, anything you can think of, trading cards, memorabilia pins, campaign stuff. I've just got a huge collection. My wife could vouch for me on that. We have a storage part of our house, and it's all my stuff that I have, packed away in storage and whatnot. I mean, I could cover my entire house, every floor, with everything. So I've been a big collector of Kennedy memorabilia, but particularly JFK Jr. Because when he died, I was just very sad. It took a few days, and it was dragged out, and it was so sad, right? So I guess I'll go back to talking again about the history of his magazine. So he flew to New York, to Toronto, and he met with investors there, and then he flew there with an instructor because he couldn't fly because of his ankle. And when he flew back to New York that night, he said that he liked flying at night in New York because of the lights. He said it was beautiful. He loved flying at night. But John didn't have a whole lot of flying hours, especially at night. In total, since John had his pilot's license since May of 1998, he had 300 hours in his Piper Saratoga that he purchased. I believe it was in March 1999 or April 1999. I forget. It's very new. he didn't have very much time in that airplane because of his broken ankle. And when he was in that plane with his broken ankle, he was with an instructor. Um, Most of the time he was with an instructor. In fact, the day he flew, uh, his coworkers were kind of, he told them he was flying that night, and they looked at his leg and, sure, you'll be able to. He's like, oh, tell all the staff, anybody who asks, don't worry about it, I'm flying with an instructor tonight. His plan was that he was gonna leave New York City with his sister-in-law and meet his wife at the airport in Fairfield, New Jersey, and fly along the coastline, drop his sister-in-law off on Martha's Vineyard, and then continue on to Hyannisport for his cousin Rory, Robert Kennedy's youngest daughter, her wedding the very next day, July 17th. That was his plan on Friday, July 16th, 1999, the day he died. So basically, the last 2 nights of John's life, he spent it at the Stanhope Hotel in New York City. He always looked at the Stanhope Hotel as a kind of a refuge in his life growing up, because it wasn't far from 1040 Fifth Avenue, where his mother grew up, where his mother's house was, and where he grew up in New York City. So people say that he went there to focus on George, and his head was, he had a lot going on at the time, with being asked to run for politics continuously, especially since that Senate seat was opening in 2000, and Hillary Clinton, which we know now, won that seat, and just furthered her position in politics to be Secretary of State and whatever she is now, ambassador. I'm not sure if it's something. But I tell you one thing, I know for a fact, and anybody in this world would agree with me, that had John F. Kennedy Jr. lived, and if he ran for that spot, he definitely would have won that election by a landslide, and Hillary Clinton would probably be just Bill Clinton's wife. He totally would have blew her out of the water when it came to that election. He would have won that election with flying colors, easily, no problem. And I think that had John been a senator, I think eventually he would have moved on to being governor of New York City. He admitted that he would prefer to have been governor of New York City rather than senator. But then, if we could use the current president, Barack Obama, who I'm not insulting here in any way, shape, or form, but Barack Obama came out of nowhere. He wasn't a big time, at the time, the politicians on the scene, like Joe Lieberman, I can't even really think off the top of my head, like, who were. George W. Bush was just a normal, governor, like, I can't think of anybody really, but he just, Obama came out of nowhere pretty much, and then next thing you know, he's president of the United States. So I think that John F. Kennedy Jr., if he would have run, he probably would have run for the Democratic position, although some of his friends thought that John was a little bit more Republican than Democratic, coming from a Democratic family. They thought his ideals and his, the way he felt and the way he talked and whatnot, they felt he was a little bit more Republican than like a Democrat. So I think that had John F. Kennedy Jr. lived and not died in this plane crash, I think that if he wanted to, he easily could have been in the White House. People loved John F. Kennedy Sr., and they were sad whenever he died, assassinated on November 22nd, 1963, and he was buried on November 25th, 1963, which was his son's 3rd birthday, where he saluted his father, but he said he didn't remember doing that. It's just he only remembers because of pictures and video. So people loved JFK, so that they had hopes and aspirations for John F. Kennedy Jr. They wanted to see his son turn out alright and do something with his life. So when John F. Kennedy Jr. you know, he died at the age of 38. He was only married for less than 3 years. He had no children. He had nieces and nephews because his sister Caroline got married in 1986 and had 3 children. I mean, they have these National Enquirer, you know, Globe magazine, JFK Jr., Love Child, and all that. Actually, I would be amazed, I would love it if JFK Jr. did have a child out there somewhere. That means JFK legacies would live on, you know. But I'm gonna point something out about that. It's funny because at the time of John's death, a couple of months before, the CEO of Hachette, those magazines, American Media, I think was the company. The CEO for Hachette was a man by the name of David Pecker, and he left to being CEO of that. No, he left to go to become CEO of, I think it was American Media Incorporated, which owned the National Enquirer, Globe, all those, you know, crazy magazines, you could say, but stuff you don't believe. Globe, National Enquirer, and all those. So he became the CEO of that company that put out those magazines. So over the years since John has been dead, I mean, you would think that it's the CEO who had great respect for John, who wrote about John in tribute magazines after he died as being a great person to be around. He was just this, you know, he was more than what people thought. You know, he wasn't stupid. You know, just because John failed the New York bar exam twice, passed it on his 3rd time. Like, you know, he gave nothing but praise for John. But over the years, he's kind of dragged John's name a bit through the mud, you know, like kind of saying, well, not necessarily through the mud, but making these allegations like, you know, Carolyn's drug abuse caused JFK Jr.'s plane crash. Bomb blew up JFK Jr.'s plane. John didn't want to fly. He was forced to fly because his sister wanted a ride or something like that. And JFK Jr. mystery solved, cell phone causes his instruments to assassinations. I mean, stuff he put out in Globe, National Enquirer, and he was good friends with John. So I always found that funny. Very hypocritical for somebody to be a so-called friend of John's to leave being the CEO of the magazine company that was putting out his George magazine to go to the National Enquirer. But John, being as graceful and wonderful as a person as he was, as soon as he found out that David was leaving to go become CEO of that particular company, John wrote him a handwritten letter saying, you know what, good luck, I hope everything works out well for you, and I wish you nothing but the best, and thank you for being a part of my you know, experience in the magazine world. So John was being the very nice guy by saying and doing that. And but then, like I said, you know, as a CEO, I was just through the years, just different stuff. I've got all the magazines. I pretty much bought every JFK Jr. magazine you can think of. So many, you know, even if they were ridiculous, I still bought them, just, you know, for collecting purposes. So today John would be 54. He died, he was 38. He would have been 39 later that year. And like I said, he was married for a little bit under. He would have been married, well, actually, he died in July. That September, he would have been married 3 years. So it would be, now it would be 18 years married. But at the time, they said they were headed for divorce. They were fighting a lot. Carolyn was addicted to drugs. She had John kicked out of the place, 20 North Moore Street in Tribeca, where they live. You know, and that's where things get a little tricky, because the last 2 nights of his life, John did spend them at the Stanhope Hotel in New York City, and people said he went there to work on George, you know, to get his mind sorted out and whatnot. But the fact is, and I've heard this, read this, and his friends and people have said, he and Carolyn had a fight. Simple as that, plain and simple. They had an argument to the point where John felt, okay, I'm just gonna stay away, let things cool down. We'll have a good weekend, you know, my cousin's wedding, and I just need these 2 nights to kind of relax. And you know, his ankle and stuff was bothering him, you know, and he was irritated with that since May. So May, all of June and half. He died on the 16th of July. So and people say that he was telling people they were heading for divorce, and he didn't know what else to do. I don't know if these sources that say all that stuff about John is true. It's hard to say. I particularly don't think they were headed for divorce. I think they loved each other and they were happy. And John wanted to have kids almost immediately, right away. Like he didn't want to wait. But Carolyn, she was cracking under the pressure of being JFK Jr.'s wife from the very beginning. I mean, when they arrived back from their honeymoon in Turkey, John introduced Carolyn to the press outside his apartment. I guess you can call it an apartment. It's in a building with or a duplex or whatnot. I don't know. There must have been 50 reporters there, and John was saying, "Look, this is a very big step for anybody to take, and especially for a private person who Carolyn was. She was just a publicist for Calvin Klein. She worked for some of his high-profile customers, but for JFK Jr., she was an average person." And he talked about her one time to somebody, and they're like, "Well, who is she? What does she do? What's her thing?" And he's like, "There's nothing. She's really is. She's nothing." But he meant it in the best way. He meant it like she's not a high-profile person. She doesn't look to make a name for herself. She's just very private. And I've met her, and they say they met while jogging in Central Park. They said they met while she was working for Calvin Klein. He just happened to be where she was working and liked her a lot and bought 3 suits and left and got her phone number, and that was it. They had that fight in the park before they got married, which somebody videotaped the whole thing and sold it to, I think, a Current Affair hard copy for millions of dollars. And it showed John and Carolyn fighting over ring yanked off her hand, dog was there and all that. They showed the fight, but they didn't show the aftermath of the fight, which was John sitting on the corner of a street on the concrete crying, and Carolyn came up to him and they embraced, hugging each other lovingly. And the world, when they showed that program, when they showed that video, they didn't show that they made up like that. They just showed the fight. And I mean, that's a private thing that should never have been videoed. And the person who videoed that, I think you're an idiot. Even now, you're stupid to go in such a private matter. It's just money. But eventually, I think JFK Jr. got that person back because he tried to not sue them, but one particular time he was walking with Carolyn and his dog again, and he found this one person pursuing him and them in a Jeep, and he knew that was the person responsible for that tape, and he climbed on the hood of that person's car, and he freaked right out. He even jumped off and put his hand in and tried to yank their camera from them, and he was telling them right off, and he had enough. I mean, he lived his life in the spotlight. I mean, the whole world knew his name before he did. I mean, he was JFK's son. I mean, he was videotaped from the moment. He had Secret Service protecting him to the age of 16. Think about that. Your every move in the public eye, or even when you're at home doing whatever, there's always Secret Service detail around. I mean, when you're a teenager, especially if when he turned 16, that went away. He was so thankful for that. So thankful. He could be a normal person. When he's 15 years old, you want to get away, you want to smoke cigarettes, or maybe smoke marijuana or something, or who knows, you just want to do teenage things, So he made a game out of escaping his Secret Service people, and after a while, they were just like, whatever, let him do what he wants, but we'll be around for a little bit. So he said that to the reporters. He said, "Look, Carolyn is a private person. I appreciate if you could give her all the space and time that she needs to cope, with suddenly becoming a public person, because she's such a private person and never had a life in the spotlight." But that wasn't gonna happen. She was absolutely hounded by the paparazzi. after that, everywhere she went, she quit her job. The stress was just unbearable. I guess she was on antidepressants. They said that she was doing a lot of illegal drugs with her. How do I explain it? She had a lot of friends in the fashion industry who were gay males, and she used to have them over partying at her house, I guess, from what I've read in friends' books and whatnot. And John would be mad because she would kick him out, and they'd have these big parties and whatnot. I'm not saying I have anything against gay people. I don't think I'm saying that. She just had a lot of gay friends in the fashion industry, which is normal because it's, some guys that's what they do. Anyways, so the paparazzi just wouldn't let up. So John was frustrated because he wanted to have kids very soon. He had a name picked out. If it was a boy, he was gonna name him Flynn. That was the name that he had picked out. Sadly, John never got to have a child with his wife. Maybe he did have a love child. If they say he had a mistress somewhere, and there's this one girl, I think her name is Sybil something. She claims to have. She never had John's child. She said that unfortunately didn't work out, but I think she lived in Colorado, and whenever he would travel, he would visit her and whatnot. I'm not sure the details. I've just seen her story and her pictures and whatnot. She said she would have loved to have had John's child, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But there's, like I said, the magazine of his old CEO claims that John had a what do you call that? A magic child or love child. Excuse me. Anyhow, to get back, I guess, to my original thing was, John would be 54 today. It just makes you wonder what he would have done with his life. I think he would have went into politics, because I think that he would have said, okay, George, we took it for 5, 6, 7 years, and now I'm going to move on to a different chapter in my life. He loved to fly. Aviation was a big part of his life at the time when he died. He had a Cessna, a 1990, I don't remember the year, Cessna airplane that he had, and then eventually he bought the 1995 Piper Saratoga 2, I believe it was, HP, high-powered, a very high-powered plane, very well-known, Piper Saratoga, everybody plane-wise. But he also had what they call a go-kart, a go-kart with a parachute, an ultralight plane. That's what it was. That's how he broke his ankle on Memorial Day weekend. He was taken off on the compound in Hyannisport, but he didn't have enough clearance, so he crashed into a tree. And when he fell to the ground, he broke his ankle, and that's how he broke his ankle. And while he was doing that, his wife was watching, and in horror, she watched him crash and fall to the ground. And he got up and limped away and said, "I just think I broke my ankle." And she said, "Don't you ever scare me like that ever again." So that kind of threw her off with flying right there. And she told people on several occasions she didn't want to fly with him. She said she didn't trust him. Not necessarily because he was reckless, but maybe because he was new. Maybe she knew that John was like a guy who would like to push the envelope, a person who, if given his situation, his circumstances, would have took chances to get to where he was going, and that's what they think happened the night he died. I mean, the girl, she was shopping. Carolyn was shopping for a dress that day for the wedding the next day, and the salesperson she was talking to, I forget the details, but apparently she told the person that she just didn't trust him flying, and she was worried about flying that night. She said she clearly was, but that seems to be, that's contradicting, because John said that as soon as it was legal, his wife came up with him flying, and she loved flying with him. Apparently, that was she loved to fly with John. Whenever she had the opportunity to fly with him, she did. She had no fears of flying with John. The only thing that had his dog. His dog hated it. You could not get his dog on that plane, and when he did, his dog was miserable the entire time. And you can't have a dog on an airplane when you're trying to fly. It is a very, very big distraction. You need to be focused when you're a pilot. So that would have been a major distraction. That would have been a big no-no for John. So John was editor-in-chief of George magazine, and like I said, their contract with Hachette was expiring, so John was looking for new investors who might take over if Hachette didn't want to renew their contract. And like I said, the CEO left, so the new guy who came in, his name was Jack Klieger. He's probably still the CEO of the particular company that is Hachette to this day. And apparently John met with him the morning that he died, and the CEO later said that they both walked out of that meeting that morning feeling pretty good about the future of the magazine. You know, they kind of both agreed that that the magazine from the beginning never really had a well thought out business plan to start with, because basically George magazine was conceived by John and his friend Michael Bergin, and they had an idea, you know, that politics and pop culture could relate together, and it could make politics an interesting subject. You know, their motto was not just politics as usual, and that really is a really good statement when you think about it. Not just politics as usual. It made politics seem interesting, and people like me, who was young at the time, got interested in politics. And today, I'm very, very, very into politics. I'm after politics for not personal stuff, for stuff in my area, for what I'm doing. I'm after politicians all the time. So JFK Jr.'s magazine inspired me from the age of 15 on till now. Just, you know, the magazine ceased production in early 2001. The final issue had JFK Jr.'s picture on the cover, and the way the magazine justified that was saying, look, we lost tens of millions of dollars with the magazine since John died. Actually, when he did die, the magazine profits went through the roof. Everybody was buying the magazine because they wanted to have a piece of JFK Jr. But, you know, that was, you know, I mean, the Star, National Enquirer, Globe, People, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, all these magazines, they kept putting JFK, they kept the story going till late August, you know what I mean, because it was, you know, a week and some of the process of his death being played out and his burial and whatnot. But still, I mean, you could have walked into a grocery store on August 10th, 1999, and Globe would have had probably images from John's funeral, you know, at St. Thomas More Church in New York City on July 23rd. You know, like it was dragged out quite a bit. So basically, they were hoping to renew with Hachette. That's where they wanted to stay. But John was looking around to see what other officers he could have, because obviously his name was a big part in George's being in the magazine world. I mean, think about the magazines that are out there now. I mean, they say 90% of startup magazines fail within their first year of publication. So that means you got to be in the other 10%. Well, if you're being in the other 10%, that could be 10,000 magazines, whereas the other 90% could be, you know, 100,000, 150,000 magazines that fail. So you got to be in that 10% margin. So John admitted, he said, you know, I can't pretend that my last name didn't help create this magazine. He said, but whether or not this magazine stands the test of time will show that my last name doesn't mean anything, and that the work and effort going into this magazine will be, you know, put forth by the people who work for it. And you know, it will be its own thing, and it won't be me. The focus won't be on me. Um, After John died, they left. When he died, the August issue was on the newsstands with guest editor Ben Stiller as the guest editor. So the final editor's letter that John wrote was really for the July 1999 issue, because Ben Stiller wrote the one for the August 1999 issue that was on the newsstands at the time. And in the summertime, people don't read. Summertime's not a good time for magazines. You can have your magazine this thin, but whereas in December, your magazine can be that thick. Because in the summertime, people, they hit the beaches, they travel, they don't sit down and read magazines throughout. John was joking with his friends, and he was hopping around the office, and he threw the August issue on one of his co-workers' desk and said, "Look, Ma, no ads." No ads, meaning that ads make your magazine. When John's magazine started out, the very first issue, I think the first issue of George magazine was the first magazine ever to have that many ads. I guess it had 160 some pages that had ads, just ads, not of the other content of the articles and whatnot that was written. And they made a deal with the people who put ads in the first one that they would have to put ads in the second one. They just didn't want it, advertise in my magazine once and never again. No, you gotta, if you're gonna do it once, you gotta do it twice at least. And after a while, John was even taking, he said that his magazine wasn't gonna take like political group ads, stuff like that. And one time John ran an ad for the NRA, and somebody had wrote in and they said, "The NRA? JFK Jr.? I never thought I would see that," meaning his father was assassinated because of a gun. But he was taking NRA advertisements, and his co-workers and stuff were saying, and John's like, "We need the pages, we need the ad, we need the revenue." He's like, I know I'm going against what I said, 3-4 years ago, but we do have to progress, and it's true. You have to progress over time. With your product, you just can't stand still. Everything increases: profits, revenue, expenses. The cost of mailing, trucking, production. It's a magazine. It's paper. It has to be distributed. Distributors, all over the world, whatnot. You had to pay your employees, you had your magazine people, but then you had your other people that was taken care of by the company or whatnot. So basically, that morning he died. He met with the new CEO, and apparently, for all that guy has said, he said that he felt that him and John felt pretty good about the future of the magazine, and they hoped that they could go forward together and make this magazine last. And John had meetings that morning of his death with his editorial staff, and he told them, he said, "As long as I'm alive, this magazine will continue to publish." And then at another part of that day, he said, "At Christmas time, we will all have our jobs." Meaning to say, if you're the art director, fine. If you're the assistant to the creative director, we're all gonna have our jobs at Christmas time. And those statements now, knowing what happened, as long as I'm alive, this magazine will continue to publish. When John died, like I said, they had a new CEO, and like 2 days later, that CEO, Jack Clear, called in the staff, and he was talking about the magazine. And from what I've read, a lot of the staff were like, "Who is this guy to talk about John?" He didn't know John. He didn't know anything about him. But sorry, I'm recording right now. Well, you can. Okay. Sorry, somebody came through the door. But he was talking about the future of George magazine, and he was saying, you know, I know this isn't the right time to be talking about this, he said, but you know, we're gonna have to have a meeting at some point to see what's gonna happen. He said right now John's magazine's future is in the hands of his family, whether or not they want to have anything to do with John's you know, it was John's baby, you could say. So his estate, most of it went to his sister and his a few other people, but mostly to his sister and his nieces and his nephew. So she sold off John's shares eventually to George, but George kept publishing, like I said, until early 2001. But in October of 1999, they put a picture of an American flag that was a really nice picture that John had liked, and they just put simply John F. Kennedy Jr. a tribute with that very nice picture, and they left the September 1999 issue as it was, because that was the last issue that he edited. They had a letter. It wasn't a letter, the editor's letter. It was called a letter for the editor, since John had perished. You know, there's so many, you know, what ifs, and you know, I've steered this conversation's all over the place. It's 40 minutes. I'm talking from this and that, but I guess it was just a video I wanted to make, just to say, you know, happy birthday, John, and you know, I never knew you. I feel like I did know you in some sort of way, and it's sad what happened to you and your wife, you know, and her sister. I mean, I feel bad for your wife's mother. You know, she lost 2 daughters that night, and one she had twins, and one of the twins was on that plane. So now she only has the one left, and it was just heartbreaking. The world mourned as they mourned, you know, when John F. Kennedy was murdered, you know, whenever John Lennon was murdered, you know, it was a world event. It was sad. I made a video before on what happened to JFK Jr. the night that he died, based on everything that I've read and put together. There's so many different things. Nobody really knows an official report or whatnot of what happened to John when he died and whatnot. But I think that had John lived, he would have ran for that Senate seat that was being vacated in early 2000. He would have won that. Hillary Clinton would stand a chance. I mean, what the hell did she have to do with running for a Senate seat in New York? She had no links to New York. I think only in 2000 did her and her husband buy a cottage home on Long Island. She had no ties to New York City. So actually, in one of his co-workers' books I wrote, he walked in one day and he threw a newspaper down on his table, and it said that Hillary Clinton is considering running for the open Senate seat in New York City in early 2000. And John said to his friend, he said, so where am I supposed to run, in Arkansas? And that's where they're from. So that right there was an indication of the fact, like, oh, well, he was considering it. So a lot of people, you know, they've always asked him about politics, and what, you're going to go into politics. It was always an everyday thing, that and his father's assassination and whatnot. And you know, he said, you know, a lot of times he said, you know, a lot of things are going on right now, and politics isn't a big issue, but right now a magazine and what I'm doing is a good issue. But a lot of his friends said that he was considering running for that Senate seat, and I think had he ran for that Senate seat, he would have won it. Then he would have won anywhere. People would have voted for JFK Jr. He would have easily won the Democratic ticket for the presidential nomination. He would have beat anybody. I mean, JFK Jr. was loved by many people. He could have had the young adults. He could have had the people who longed for JFK. He could have had the youth support, because he was youthful at the time. If you know, he could even have had. People say he could have had the gay support. Gay men who were very attracted to JFK Jr. And you can't deny it. JFK Jr. was a very attractive looking guy. I'm a heterosexual male, but when I see pictures of JFK Jr., there's no denying that he was a very handsome man. So people say he would have had that vote. They said they would have had votes from women. I mean, look when he walked on the Oprah Winfrey show in 1995 when she interviewed him when he put out George magazine. The women in that audience when he walked out, they were practically drooling. Like, it's certain. I mean, women were throwing themselves at John constantly on a daily basis. People were giving him their phone numbers and everything. So I think that JFK Jr. eventually would have became president of the United States of America. But I guess that's all speculation, right? I mean, it's hard to say. Nobody really knows. It's one of those what ifs, what might have been. But I think had John lived and not died that night, I think our world, well, the American world, other than Canada, would be a little bit different right now. Maybe Barack Obama wouldn't be the president of the United States. Maybe JFK Jr. would be. It's hard to say. But anyhow, I made this video just to say happy birthday, JFK Jr. He would be 54 today, and I made it into a 45-minute video. I would just like to talk, I guess. I know I know a lot of history and whatnot, I guess. So I mean, if I get comments telling me to shut the hell up, well, I'm gonna shut up now. So thanks for watching this video, and rest in peace, John. You died way too young. I'm gonna be 32 next month. You were 38, so I'm getting closer to your age, and it's very young. You died way too young. So thanks for watching this video. That's got a lot of history of Kennedy family and John and whatnot. I could go on forever and forever, but I think I'll end it here. Rest in peace, John.